Let's be clear, this isn't about one particular religion. It's about the right of Americans of any religion to live out their faith without the government picking and choosing which doctrines they're allowed to follow. When one religion is threatened, all religions are threatened. And allowing this particular infringement would surely ease the way for others. This is something my constituents understood immediately in this debate. I've received a lot of letters from religious leaders and concerned citizens who know that an attack on the beliefs of one religion is an attack on the beliefs of any religion. And many of them make the case a lot better than I can. So I'd like to just share for a moment some thoughts from my constituents on this issue. I'll start with the Catholic Archbishop of Louisville, Archbishop Joseph Kurtz. Here's what he wrote. The federal government, which claims to be of, by, and for the people, has just dealt a heavy blow to almost a quarter of those people, the Catholic population, and to the millions more who are served by the Catholic faithful. In so ruling, the administration has cast aside the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, denying to Catholics our nation's first and most fundamental freedom, that of religious liberty. We cannot, we will not comply with this unjust law. People of faith cannot be made second-class citizens. Here's what Bishop Ronald Gaynor of the Catholic Diocese of Lexington had to say. Civil law and civil structures should recognize and protect the Church's right and obligation to participate in society without expecting us or forcing us to abandon or compromise our fundamental moral convictions. If we have an obligation to teach and give eyewitness to moral values that should shape our lives and inspire our society, then there is a corresponding obligation that we be allowed to follow and express freely those religious values. Anything short of government protection of that freedom represents an unwarranted threat of government interference. Here's the president of the University of the Cumberlands, Jim Taylor. The intrusion of the administration into the right of the free exercise of religion is disappointing. The choice to interfere with religious hospitals, charities, and schools with a mandate violating their religious views is disconcerting and will in all probability be totally counterproductive, further polarizing this nation. And finally, I want to read a letter from Dr. R. Albert Mohler, Jr. I mentioned him earlier. He's the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, the flagship school of the Southern Baptist Convention and one of the largest seminaries in the world. I'm going to quote it in full, and then I'd like to submit it for the record. Here's what Dr. Mohler had to say. I write to express my deepest concern regarding the recent policy announced by the Department of Health and Human Services that will require religious institutions to provide mandated contraceptive and anti-abortion services to employees. This policy, announced by Secretary Sebelius, tramples on the religious liberty of American Christians, who are now informed that our colleges, schools, hospitals, and other service organizations must violate conscience in order to comply with the Affordable Care Act. This exemption announced by the Obama administration is so intentionally narrow that it will cover only congregations and religious institutions that employ and serve only members of our own faiths. This exemption deliberately excludes Christian institutions that have served this nation and its people through education, social services, and health care. The new policy effectively tells Christian institutions that if we want to remain true to our convictions and our consciences, we will have to cease serving the public. This is a policy that will either require millions upon millions of Americans to accept a gross and deliberate violation of religious liberty, or to accept the total secularization of all education and social services. Christians of conscience are now informed by our own government that we must violate our convictions on a matter of grave theological and moral significance. This is not a Catholic issue. The inclusion of abortion forms of birth control, such as emergency contraceptives, will violate the deepest beliefs of millions upon millions of Christians, along with Americans of other faiths who share these convictions. The religious objections to this policy are rooted in centuries of teaching, belief, and moral instruction. He goes on. This policy is an outrage that violates our deepest constitutional principles and tramples religious liberty under the feet of deliberate government policy. As many religious leaders have already indicated, we cannot comply with this policy. The one-year extension offered by the Obama administration is a further insult, providing a year in which we are, by government mandate, to prepare to sacrifice our religious liberties and violate conscience. I, along with millions of other Americans, humbly request that the Congress of the United States provide an immediate and effective remedy to this intolerable violation of religious liberty. Please do not allow this abominable policy to stand. Protection of our most basic and fundamental liberties now rests in your hands. So, Mr. President, I'll conclude with this. If there's one good thing about this debate, it's that it's given us all an opportunity to reaffirm what we believe as Americans. It gives us an opportunity to stand together and to say, this is what we're all about. This is what makes America unique. This is what makes it great. That's why I'll be voting for the Blunt amendment. And that's why it's my sincere hope that the President and those in his administration come around to this view too. That they come to realize from the outpouring we've seen over the past several weeks from across the country that the free and diverse exercise of religion in this country has always been one of our nation's greatest assets. And one of the things that truly sets us apart. As I said at the outset of this debate, I hope the President reconsiders this deeply misguided policy and reverses it. It crosses a dangerous line. It must be reversed, but if he doesn't, either Congress or the courts will surely act.